What's up, folks? I'm Deeg. This is Deeg Thoughts. And today we're here to think about a sentiment recently shared in the World of Warcraft community subreddit entitled, It's Not Them, It's Us, about the player's responsibility for making the game and the experience they want within games. A fascinating and beautifully written comment. Before we get there, I want to use this thread of examination as an excuse to talk about my experiences playing World of Warcraft in the last couple years. Let's go. So here's me in one of my only attempts to make a scripted video in 2019. Oh boy.
You think you do, but you don't. Are y'all familiar with this quote? It's from J. Allen Brack, now president of Blizzard Entertainment, responding to a fan asking if Blizzard would ever consider turning back the clock on World of Warcraft by offering previous expansions as standalone experiences.
You think you do, but you don't.
This response is remarkable and telegraphs quite a lot. World of Warcraft has changed dramatically over the 15 years since its original release. It's improved in thousands of tiny ways, such as
Remember when you had to spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon.
Despite this improvement and many more, however, tens of thousands of WoW players have resorted to what are essentially black market WoW servers in order to get what exactly?
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
Fans are clamoring to go back. The clamor was loud enough so that 1 year after,
You think you do, but you don't.
this happened.
Ice cream is one of my favorite desserts. Personally,
This moment gives me chills.
I love chocolate and I love cookies and cream. Cookies and cream is actually my all-time favorite dessert. But I understand that for some of you, your favorite flavor is vanilla.
Vanilla.
I am pleased and also a little bit nervous to announce the development of a classic server option for World of Warcraft.
Wow. Why this happened, I can only speculate. What interests me more is what the juxtaposition of these two events.
You think you do, but you don't.
Classic server option for World of Warcraft
Means for the broader industry of games like WoW. Games as a whole have changed a lot in these 15 years. The proliferation of broadband, the end of Moore's Law, and the explosion of mobile gaming and microtransactions have all made a mark on the games that get funded and produced in 2019. The general attitude telegraphed by Brack when
And here's where I actually lose my 2019 self. I think I skipped a few steps in drawing these conclusions you're about to hear. But try to be nice on Deeg from the past. He meant well.
he said,
You think you do, but you don't.
is that if you make any part of your game hard to access, you're leaving gamers behind and money on the table. To get huge, you've got to go casual, and you've got to take the flashiest rewards out of the game and cram them into a storefront. In 2004, World of Warcraft had no storefront. It had no dungeon finder, no daily quests, no ways to skip progression, and was brutal on unskilled, undedicated, or unsocial players. Rather than opening up your wallet on payday to progress your character, you had to build guilds, schedule raids, and grind. That's what this guy is asking for. That's what Brack is giving us in exactly 1 week, despite his previous insistence that not only would they not, but that it's not even what we wanted. On August 26th, the clock will be turning back, not only on World of Warcraft, but also on the casual mass market slope it has slid down since 2004.
Ooh.
Will it pay off for Blizzard and set the gaming industry on a new trajectory? Or will it be a speed bump on its slow decline into manipulation and meaninglessness? Whatever the answers,
That
can be sure
writing.
of one thing. They will inform the way the games are produced and published over the next decade. This is now a moment, even if you're not a WoW player, that is worth paying attention to. I know I will be. These are my thoughts. What about you? Are you excited for WoW Classic?
Oh man.
What are your hopes for it? Let us know by sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Also, feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Twitch. Till then, I'll see you next time.
I've always sucked at calls to action. Always, always, always. Okay. So like I was saying, I think I probably still mostly agree with what I said, at least looking back. But I didn't build my case super well in that video. Anyway, but you can hear that approaching WoW Classic, at that time, I was excited about the idea of going back to what felt to me like an old, more pure ethos for engaging in online worlds through video games. And I tested that. And we'll get there in a second. But before we do that, look at some comments. Nostalgious vibes, hell yeah. NS Operative, I feel like half the announcements at the latest BlizzCon were classic reboots of old titles. Have I heard of the Ship of Theseus? Ship of Theseus. Oh man, that rings a bell. Could you show me a link? Or a brief explanation in the chat is fine too. Yeah, it's very safe to make reboots when you're playing with that much money. That's a problem with any studio that gains success is the more success you have, the less creative freedom you have. And the least creatively interesting thing you can do is just remake or re-release something that's already been successful in the past. It's a reference to Marvel's latest show, WandaVision. Of course, a further callback to the Ship of Theseus, where, while we're waiting for that, Doge Go says, I feel like the soul of Blizzard is dead. If that's true, and I'm not sure what I think, but if that's true, I think that the soul of Blizzard that you saw in World of Warcraft probably died the day World of Warcraft released. Probably. And I have a hypothesis about that, which I'll build to. The pieces of a ship are replaced to fix the ship. Oh, is the repair ship the same ship as it originally was? Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that one before, and it's operative. Let's keep those in mind. Let's keep those things in mind. I'm going to continue to share what I actually did experience playing Classic WoW. We're going to answer these questions through the lens of those experiences, or at least explore those questions. And just so everyone's not bored, I'm going to pull up some B-roll. Lex, are you excited? I'm talking about World of Warcraft. Your second favorite game to hate? True Strike Shoulders. Thinks it's all about Classic. You don't like my True Strike Shoulders? I'm going to tell you about my experience. And you all can and should take it for what it's worth. I trust you to judge the merit of my comments for yourself. Let's get some B-roll going. Okay. So this is B-roll from a fun competition I did last year, actually, where me and a buddy of mine did a hardcore tournament where we tried to level as high as we can get without dying in an 8-hour span. Spoiler alert, we did not win. Not even get close. But we had fun. And we didn't die. Okay. So why did I start playing World of Warcraft Classic? Well, I laid the foundation with the video we just showed. without getting too much into the details, um, I have been playing games for the last few years up to WoW Classic in 2018, 2019, games like Warframe, games like Destiny, and a few others, and feeling very frustrated that the interactions that I had with people who I played those games with ended up feeling really transactional. And I felt very let down by the social designs of those games to actually promote community building. And one of the examples I always look back to when experiencing that frustration was WoW Classic, because WoW Classic, at the time it was released in 2004, did a great job of finding tent poles to build community tents around. It did a great job of it. This is at a time where there is no social media, really. Not really. The ability to knowledge share sucked. The world was something you explored with yourself and your friends and your guild, really. And if you were someone looking on forums to learn about rotations, you were one of like the 1%. It was not that common. Or if you had add-ons. So different era. And most people who were playing these games were people who had just transitioned off of dial-up modems and were the early nerds on the internet. So much different culture. But beyond that, my experience playing WoW Classic coming into it, looking to actually find a community, looking to get something out of it that I hadn't gotten out of these other games, was more or less a success, a limited success. So here are some details. Number one, leveling up was fucking amazing. I loved the experience of leveling up in WoW Classic. And this was in phase 1 of the Classic re-release. So I started on launch day. If you exclude the technical issues that come from playing any game like this on launch day, it was great, bottom up. I played, I mostly duoed on my way up with a friend of mine. I played a warrior, he played a mage. Very little synergy, but that's what we wanted to play. And the experience of leveling up the whole way felt fun and challenging and meaningful and interesting, despite the fact that we'd both gone through it before many, many years ago. And it didn't feel like just pure nostalgia. Like the game held up. It still felt good. There's a lot that can be said about the technical achievement for even pulling this off in the first place. But I have to just underline that the effect of it, if you're a person who wants to play a really fun multiplayer RPG, that's what Phase 1 Classic WoW was to me. My argument for your average gamer is I feel like starting from level 1 to level 60, to doing dungeons, to getting into raids, to killing a Nyxian and Ragnaros, that line is one of the strongest MMORPG experiences you can have anywhere, period. The progression of your character and of your connections and of your mastery of the world and of the mystery of the world feels good every single step of the way. And I have not had a progressing MMORPG experience that felt better than that ever. So what else? I really, really enjoyed PvP in Phase 1, which is not to say I did a lot of it, but Phase 1 of WoW Classic was different than the rest of WoW because there's no honor system. And there's no battlegrounds. And so what PvP actually happens when there's no honor system or battlegrounds? Well, all you really get is people defending territory and ganking each other. It's mainly a pride thing, or mainly a protecting a quest resource thing. And there's a certain, to me, interesting elegance that comes from PvP happening organically as a result of the PvE incentives within the game, which is to access quest resources, mobs, and control areas, flight masters, all that stuff. There's no gear to it. Yes, and it's operative. There's no grind to it. There's no incentive for the player to do extremely degenerate PvP things. If people are going to be extremely degenerate PvP players, all those motivations are purely internal incentives. And you probably can think of a few people who have those internal incentives to PvP. They're usually orc warlocks on the road in Stranglethorn Vale. So I loved actually the experience of not being able to quest in certain areas of the world. It felt super like it felt like the kind of thing that should happen in a virtual world. To have the enemy faction in control of half of Stranglethorn Vale or half of Hillsbrad Foothills or the Arathi Hinterlands, name your zone. Not Hinterlands, Highlands, sorry. And to me, adding honor to that system corrupted the incentives in such a way that it created unfun gameplay across the board. And the only way that ended up getting balanced out was Battlegrounds. So I stopped playing WoW Classic just before Phase 2 hit. I actually achieved the goal of getting to 60 with my buddy. We joined a guild. We helped get it ready to go for Molten Core. We progressed through it. We killed Ragnaros. We killed the Nixia. And then at that point, Ragnaros to me felt like winning the game. I felt like I'd had a satisfying progression, and I didn't need to repeat all the raid progression and the PvP progression that followed, because I had done it all before. I know, Lex, this is painful for you to hear. And I do want you to tell me what you think, especially where you think I'm wrong. But for me, for someone who likes the social experience of the game and who wanted to see if what I saw in the game was still there, that was enough. And I had an inkling of what I was in for if I decided to stay. And actually, I totally underestimated how shitty it would have been to stay. Because at the time, I didn't know about the world buff meta that was going to emerge for raids and WoW Classic. I didn't know that was going to happen. And that to me, if I had stuck around, would have been one of the things that would have gotten me to stop, because I like playing my character. And I'm not going to summarize what the world buff meta is here. Suffice it to say, it's a well, I might get there, but I'm not going to talk about it right this second. So I felt like I beat the game in Phase 1. And actually, if you look at the way that the content was added on, and if you look at the through line of some of the quest lines that were kind of trying to start being built, killing Ragnaros is quite a satisfying end to a lot of those things. And here I'm repeating myself. So let's go back to my notes. I mentioned how I disliked the honor system. I mentioned how I didn't feel like I needed to repeat the other raids. I already cleared Blackwing Lair, AQ20, AQ40. I did Nax up to 4 Horsemen in vanilla. And the one thing I was sad to miss was Battlegrounds, actually, because I really liked Battlegrounds back in the day. I think they're really fun. I had fond memories of grinding Arathi Basin on my warrior in vanilla. But it wasn't enough to keep me around. I did find a community to play with, but I'm not sure if I got the connection out of it that I really wanted. And that realization, to me, was a kind of grand retort to the idea that to get the community I wanted, I just needed to play the right game, which is the way I'd been acting for the last few years, and what I thought WoW Classic might solve for me. It didn't. Takeaways. Okay. Here is my casual review of WoW Classic. The headline is, in WoW Classic, when it's played at its best, the game is about the world, not about you. How does it pull this off? Well, first off, it's enormous. It's uneven. It has lots of weird sharp edges and toys, which creates real frustration and real discoverability and real power spikes from time to time, which all give the player a sense of agency and interest in pursuing the mysteries of the game. Let's show some raid footage here for a minute. Shake it up. think I might have some True Strike shoulders on here too. I'll make you happy, Lex. Look at those True Strike shoulders. Oh, I think I have a Brutality blade too. Nice. What else made it feel like a world that was about the game about the world rather than about you? The pacing was slow. Combat pacing is slow. The pacing of traveling and getting around the world, slow. The pacing of coming together as a group, slow. Everything has friction built in. Role dependencies. The Trinity. Okay. The Trinity made it through into modern WoW too. And it's just worth saying that there are a lot of games that have tried to cut out the Trinity, and not a lot of games that I've seen create a good alternative to it. It works. Healing, DPS, and tanking. So what else for dependencies? I love the utility dependency of World of Warcraft. I like that warlocks are kind of this weird class that can have spiky damage with hard to control aggro, but also has this undeniable utility in terms of health stones and soul stones. I love that mages have the ability to portal around the world and it can sell that service. I love the fact that that warriors are here my thoughts are complicated because I mostly remember vanilla warrior, not classic warrior, which are two different animals. Genordi loves ninja loot. This is one of the bits of the game that's uneven. It's a game that feels like it's best played cooperatively. You have to lean on others in order to get things you want. Your cooperation and interaction is forced and encouraged, which makes it feel like a game about communities, not a game about individuals. Like a virtual world should, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm not sure what I was trying to say about warriors there in this operative. I think what's interesting about them is that they are a very difficult class to play casually, but they're a very rewarding class to play like hardcore. Like they scale really crazily. But you see, Genordi, if you ninja loot and the guild kicks you, that puts the responsibility of managing the community back on the community. And that kind of thing works if you have a server that with a set number of players, rather than this mega server or phase technology crap. Because if you ninja something, you risk not being able to raid again if you stay on the server. Again, a game about communities and about the world, not about the individual. So if you try to act like an individual by ninja looting shit, if you try to do stuff that screws over other people to favor yourself, the modern retail game of WoW tries to protect everyone from that. But classic WoW does not protect you from that. It lets you be an asshole. Being an asshole is built into the design, arguably. And what that does is it confers the assignment of justice and ethics to the community, which is more world-like. This is a fairly utopian view of this. I'm aware of that, but it's worth mentioning. Okay. So I feel like I should say something about the world buff meta. So what's actually happened with WoW Classic? There's a social contract for you to either hold up to or not. Right. And the social contract is held by the people you play with rather than by the rules of the game, which I think is more interesting. And it's an approach to designing a game. It's an approach to designing a game that rewards players for doing things other than just being mechanically good and spending time playing. It rewards players for politics. It rewards players for connecting. There are all kinds of interesting things. Now let's talk about ways that the WoW vanilla broke down in Classic, in my opinion. World buffs is the first way. So it's no secret. So everyone found out that raids in WoW vanilla actually were easy when Classic came out. Isn't I was a little surprised by this because I remember them being a pain in the ass. But I suppose in hindsight it makes complete sense. And I was not part of the private server scene, Nostarius, etc. So I missed the boat on that. But Molten Core, Onyxia, Zul'Gurub, Encourage 20, 40, Blackwing Lair. These are all easy raids. Mechanically, they don't require a ton of you. Yeah, there's like some components to it where you have to grind out elemental resist, which I think is pretty interesting. But it's not something that I don't know if in the modern game is that big of a deal. But mainly, world buffs take easy fights and make them a joke. Now, there are two things about world buffs that I think are interesting to talk about, two dimensions. So the first dimension is the kind of experience that having world buffs actually creates when you're in the raid, and the other dimension is the kind of experience it creates when you're outside the raid. And maybe Les, I can lean on you to provide some insights here, and anyone else here in the chat who actually partook in the world buff meta for Classic, because I did not. I only watched it from the outside. So in the raid, having world buffs, number one, it penalizes wiping quite heavily, which is actually quite nice in a way, because it puts social pressure on players to play well, which is useful. I think it's healthy for a game like this. Number two, it puts people at a power level that you don't get to skip mechanics, which is not great. Like it's fun to push DPS, it always is, but if you're able to push DPS to a point where you can trivialize already easy fights, I think that's kind of a loss. It's not necessarily a bad thing to me that players can clear a raid in an hour. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's cool that that's possible. But the accessibility of game-altering power via world buffs is, to me, feels like it undermines the promise of raids. But, on the other hand, one of the things that I think WoW Classic has done well is show itself off as a game that more so than mechanical skill rewards conscientiousness and time investment. And the world buff meta perfectly encapsulates that reality. One of the insights that I heard Stay Safe say about Classic WoW players is that a lot of Classic WoW players don't actually probably want a challenge. They actually want to kick back and drink some beers with the boys kind of experience. And in a way, having world buffs kind of enables that, which I thought was a pretty interesting perspective. But I have to say that the experience, I cannot imagine myself or my buddy who I leveled up with taking on the experience of turning our main characters into world buff slaves. Staying logged out in order to prevent buff downtime, doing all this crap. It creates a gameplay loop that to me feels it feels like it pulls you out of the world. And we all know, like Kevin Jordan's talked about this, and many people have talked about this, that the world buff meta, the world buffs were never intended, the raids never balanced around world buffs. And it's just another downstream consequence of the fact that no one really knew what they were making with World of Warcraft. Like, they kind of had to throw a bunch of shit together. And people were trying to create cool rewards. And most of the time, those cool rewards create really neat things, like the carrot on a stick trinket that makes your mount run faster, or, you know, a level 35 quest reward that turns out to be a really interesting PvP utility at the end game. I think those are really cool. Like, that feels more world-like to me than something that's shaved down, polished, and homogenized. The ability to make bad choices means that you have an ability to make good choices. If you can't make bad ones, then you're taking choice out of your game, which takes player agency out of the game, which means, what are you fucking playing? Okay. What else? So let's talk about the players' response to the world buff meta. So actually, I want to pause the classic discussion here. Next thing we need to talk about in the World of Warcraft saga is my experience playing Shadowlands. That's right, boys and girls. Over the winter of this past year, I took on the task of playing through Shadowlands. Why did I do this? Let's get some B-roll going and I'll talk about it. Boom. There's my retail gentleman. He's getting robuffs and consuming was too hard. No, remember, Lex, I quit WoW Classic before I knew about the world buff meta. So for me, that was not why I stopped playing. I stopped playing because I had the experience that I wanted and had decided that the things I really wanted from the game, I couldn't get, which was to build this utopian gaming community of people who interact in ways I think are more interesting and deeper and more humane and that last. And it's kind of what I'm trying to do with this Twitch channel. But that's further down the line. So World of Warcraft Shadowlands came out in October last year. Just over a year since I quit playing WoW Classic. And the reason that I played it is two reasons. Number one, Covenants interested me greatly. Everything I knew about Battle for Azeroth suggested to me that modern World of Warcraft had turned into a game where choice that had long-term consequences to your character had been designed out of the game in favor of access and homogeneity. Having every single choice you can make produce a very similar outcome to the point where choices don't matter. Again, like I was saying earlier. Just for that comment, Lex. Oh, by the way, Lex, before I forget, can you shoot me a note in Discord? I want to ask you a question offline. And because we're not Discord friends, I actually can't message you. Here is my Discord, if you wouldn't mind. Or if you don't want to talk to me, that's fine too. Hey, Ground Game, how's it going? We're talking a little bit about World of Warcraft today. I'm plowing through my experiences playing WoW Classic and Shadowlands, and I'm building up to talking about a topic that is relevant broadly, not just in World of Warcraft, but also for PlanetSide and other games. But we're almost there. So the reason I got interested in playing Shadowlands again was because I thought Covenants were interesting. Covenants, what I knew about them when they were in the news is that they were going to be a player choice made at the end game where you choose one covenant per character, and wrapped up in that covenant choice is an ability that affects the power of your character in a different way, cosmetic choices, different stories, and different zones you spend time in. And the idea, and one of the main outcries I heard from certain parts of the WoW retail community was that they didn't like this system because it meant that they might not get an optimal choice. That the covenant that they want for the aesthetics and for the skins might not have the optimal power for their character. But that reality is what got me interested, because it suggested to me that there was perhaps a cross-pollination of lessons learned from the success of WoW Classic into the retail version of World of Warcraft, and that this might be the very first trickle of rocks on a landslide of changes that could affect retail and send it back in a direction where player choice and role-playing was more a part of the formula, and it was less about this min-maxing esports athlete kind of phenomenon that's emerged. And it's operative. I want to get to the min-max, then they patched Necrolord and you became the min-max. Were you playing a warrior in this operative? If you were, I had the exact same experience. That is spooky. Not the exact same. Similar, I guess. I just realized I misread what you said. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So Covenants interested me, and they suggested that WoW Shadowlands might be trying something different. And that to me was the first signal I'd seen from World of Warcraft in years that got me thinking that, oh, maybe this could be a game for me. Dimension the second, in terms of getting back into Shadowlands, was that I felt like I owed it to myself to understand what World of Warcraft had become. At that time, I had been doing the podcast for 10 months, and I'd waded into a variety of topics and clearly had an emerging interest in gaming communities, and World of Warcraft is one of the biggest, and it's one in which I have some history. And I realized that I would be doing myself a disservice by not understanding what the modern game of World of Warcraft had turned into. I had quit World of Warcraft back in Wrath of the Lich King, so I'd never experienced a mythic dungeon. I'd never experienced the way modern raiding works with the variable group sizes. I'd never experienced the modern class designs and how they changed, and a bunch of the borrowed power mechanics and weird alternate progressions and pet battles and the like. So I did all that. I jumped in and was bored to tears leveling up. Oh, man. The leveling experience, which for me meant going through Battle for Azeroth, was so uninteresting. I did get to learn my class a little bit, but it was impossible to die. I plowed through the levels, and I just prayed to God to get me to the expansion zone because I was so bored. Why is it boring? I'm probably not competent to explain why that is, but I will say that hitting 60 in Shadowlands felt freaking amazing. Like, the way that the game opened up at 60 felt so satisfying and so interesting. Finally getting to the point of choosing your covenant, locking in that choice, going down the covenant quest chain, starting to do dungeons, and for me, for the first time, doing world quests, and working up to, from dungeons, working up to heroic dungeons, working up to raid finder. That progression with two buddies, because at this point, my kid brother, actually from back home, had rolled a character and come to join us. And so I was playing with two friends, and we had such a good time. And doing battlegrounds and losing in arenas, the whole experience of being a new 60 in Shadowlands is so good. Like I mentioned, tried arenas. I think arenas have a problem in World of Warcraft of massive skill inflation, where essentially, as a competitive game gets older and older, let's change the B-roll. Let's show some arena B-roll so you can see me struggling. Yeah. Here I think I'm doing twos with my buddy who's playing a Holy Paladin. I'm playing on my Arms Warrior. Level 60 is a new level 1. Absolutely. I mean, I did win a few of these games. I think this is a little bit of luck we had here, but my experience playing arenas for WoW is that even at the low ranks, the amount of skill and execution that players have built up over time for World of Warcraft over 15 years is enormous. And even for me, someone who has played WoW before, but not at this level, and kind of was familiar with a lot of the ideas, like I knew what a polymorph was, I knew what an ice block was, I knew a lot of the mechanics, I knew what rogues could do in terms of locking me down and bursting me. I knew what disarm did. Like, I had a running start compared to someone starting the game fresh. But I found arenas to be way too brutal. And for me, they were the tip of the iceberg of one of my main takeaways for Shadowlands. Okay, so let's talk about those. But before I do that, why did I stop playing Shadowlands? Because I did. I stopped playing Shadowlands. Actually, I was really hoping that I joined a guild, a group. It was doing the heroic raid tier. So heroic is the third of 4 raid tiers in World of Warcraft, for those who don't know. And it's the highest raid tier you can do without all being in the same guild, on the same server. And I got all the way up to facing down the last boss on the heroic difficulty, but I ran out of juice and literally out of subscription time before we got him. So that was a sad day. I think I actually have the VOD from my very last raid in Shadowlands. Yeah, here it is. You can see us fighting Stone Legion generals on our way to take down Denathrius, or fail to take down Denathrius. So why did I stop? So I mentioned that I started because I wanted to learn what was going on in modern WoW, and I feel like I did. I feel like I learned what I came to learn. And while there was clearly more that I could learn, that the time investment that would be required of me to get more out of it was starting to ratchet up pretty rapidly. And also at that point, the buddy of mine who I started playing the game with had dropped off. And my brother had gotten sick of playing Alliance and wanted to go back and play Horde because he's an orc at heart, something that I really resonate with. But I got out of it what I came to get out of it. It was sad because this is actually my first time really connecting with my brother over games in a lot of years. And I wish he played something other than World of Warcraft. So that was sad to have to leave. But I couldn't put any more of my soul into the game. And I had the same issue with community finding that I had in Classic, where there's a very low ceiling on what you can get out of a community, unless you're someone who has student levels of time to play the game. Takeaways. So in contrast to Classic WoW, when at its best is a game that's about the world rather than about you, retail World of Warcraft is a game that is about you, not about the world. The game is about you. Which is bizarre in a way, because the way the story is delivered is very world heavy. The things you do don't seem to matter very much. The things that other people do, Thrall, Jaina, Bolvar, all the big players seem to really matter and are a huge part of the storytelling and the increased production values the game has. And I hope you like being a gopher. Because rather than being a story about a nobody who became a somebody, this is a story about a champion gopher doing champion levels of caddying at the golf course. So why does it feel like it's about you instead of the world? What else? The game is very even. It's very hard to make bad gear choices. All the content is extensively breadcrumbed. A quest guide with markers on the minimap and everything that you could ask for is built into the game. It is so smooth and so difficult to not find your way. It's so difficult to make bad choices. The combat pacing is extremely fast. So every single class in WoW retail seems to be designed with an ethos of giving you a button to press every single global cooldown. which is roughly every 1 to 1.5 seconds, I think. It's very, very button mashy. It feels like you're playing a fighting game. And to me, that was a fun challenge for a little while that eventually got fatiguing. Because for me, the mechanical execution of the game only has diminishing returns. Travel, same way. It's super easy to get around the world. You hardly have to think about it. Role dependencies. The Trinity is still there. Thank God for that. It's one of the best things about the game. I don't know what it would do if it lost it. But all the utility dependencies that you could need to lean on other players to get around the world and get stuff done are mostly gone. And it's a game that feels like it's meant to be played solo. And if you want to go past the solo experience, it's designed for people who are extremely interested in high levels of competition and achievement. And if you want to play group content and you don't want to be sweaty, there's not a lot of room for you in this game. WoW Shadowlands and retail over the last 15 years went from a game that was being about the world to a game that's about the player. And this operative says, oh, you don't like the Horde. Why not like the Horde? Horde are awesome. Had the same problem with WoW. I actually found a community through roleplay. You joined a D&D style guild and we made our own dice system where you can get the agency that WoW's missing while still playing WoW. That's really interesting. I know there's a big stigma on role-playing in video games, but it seems like it's one of those ways that you can actually make the experience you want, which is what this whole show is about. So that's a very apropos anecdote. I think I should say more about Shadowlands, but that's pretty much it, man. You look at the content creators for Shadowlands, and they're all people, for the most part, who, like, the big call to action in the PvP community is they want solo queue for arenas because they don't want to find teammates. This is like the big cause of PvP players. You look at Mythic Raiders, and like, what they want is to design all role playing out of the game and turn it into an esports game where you just show up for your raid. At least that's the impression I get. Preach is one of the torchbearers for that attitude. And I have a very hard time appreciating his perspective because it seems like he's so boiled down what he likes about the experience that he's unwilling to consider what people who are not like him would like. But then again, that's a common problem in gaming communities. It's so hard to figure out what you want from an experience that once you figure it out, man, you want to get it out there. So I get that. But we should all try to understand that games are not made just for us. There's a huge stigma, and in your opinion, most WoW RP is hot garbage. Raider.io and its tyranny. Yeah. Yeah, I never got to a point where people were checking my Raider.io, thankfully. Okay. So let's stitch it all together. So I just shared what I thought about WoW Classic and about WoW Vanilla and about WoW Retail, Shadowlands. Turn the B-roll off, it's distracting. And going through these experiences helped me start to put a fence around the answer to a question that's been bugging me for a long time, which is how does a company that made World of Warcraft Vanilla, a game that I loved, that had so many interesting, quirky things about it, become this polished whatever it is, become what it is today. How could this happen? And this calls back to what you mentioned before about the ship of Theseus. How if you replace every single component on a ship over the course of time, once you've done that, is this still the same ship? And clearly it's not. In the case of Blizzard. But here's my thesis, and it's actually my thesis, and it's actually an apologistic one towards Blizzard. What I've seen from Blizzard, from everything that I've been able to find in terms of media, the way things have gone over time, the things that they've implemented, is a company that actually cares about its players. And there are times when they're prevented from doing what's good for their players for reasons. Look at Warcraft Reforged. We know that was shoved out the door and it shouldn't have been. I'm talking about World of Warcraft mainly, though. And a company that cares about players listens to its players' feedback. And a company that listens to feedback incorporates feedback. When you incorporate feedback, you create this cycle of putting something out, getting the feedback, and having an effect, maybe not the next release, but the release after that. And then the thing that you created in response to the player's feedback then gets further feedback, and you iterate, and you iterate, and you iterate. And ideally, over time, this would create something that was perfect for the community. And I think that's exactly what happened to World of Warcraft, man. I think if you make a game for people who are dedicated World of Warcraft players at the start and stick with the game, and if you listen to those people's feedback while trying to leave a minimum amount of people behind, over 15 years, WoW Vanilla, I can see exactly how it would turn into WoW Shadowlands. It makes complete sense to me. I look back as early as the initial release of Alterac Valley in WoW Vanilla, the very first battleground, as a response to the problem of the fact that World PvP fucking sucked. World PvP was the worst when the Honor System came out. The game did not work once there were PvP incentives. We talked about this earlier. So what do? They put battlegrounds in. And battlegrounds make a better PvP experience for players who want to play PvP at the expense of pulling you out of the world. And that was just the first step on a long progression, I suspect, of making changes that sound good individually, but over time add up to the effect at the bottom line of transforming a game that's about the world to transforming it into a game that's about the players that you care about so much. And along the way, you lose incentives to build communities. You get this? And what interests me also is that my observation, I have this also to me suggests an explanation to why the world buff meta has emerged, to why GDKP runs in WoW Classic has emerged, and to the way that WoW Classic is being played today by people in 2021, which is that the same people who nudged Blizzard into creating the game they have today. I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about in aggregate. The same kind of feedback that shaped that game and that feedback, which is rooted in the overall rising level of competency of the average gamer, in the overall nicheification of MMOs, from being something that everyone wanted to play to being something that only really certain people want to play. All these effects in aggregate over time create a body of players who don't know how to not play efficiently. And regardless of whether you enjoy playing that way, because of things like Twitch and YouTube, a meta is created. And it's very hard to find a small community that can enjoy the game in a different way than what the meta suggests. So that's my hot take about World of Warcraft. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, I would love to hear why. But I put a lot of time into both these products, and I spent a lot of time listening to people's thoughts about it. And I really have a lot of sympathy for the path that the IP has gone down to create Shadowlands. And the subreddit says, goes back to the initial comment, you think you want it, but you don't. It's a response saying we took your feedback and made retail to go back to classic is going to be opposite direction of your feedback. Right. And then the ironic thing is that they went back to classic. These dedicated players, the ones who would show up at BlizzCon, and they turned it into a game that's about esports athletics in a way. Tragic. And now, and now that the community has given Blizzard the permission to soften no changes, we see Burning Crusade Classic being announced with a fucking level boost. What? I talked about this a few weeks ago. Actually, I guess it was when it was announced. And I think initially my individual response is, oh yeah, well, this is actually kind of cool. It might get me to play Burning Crusade Classic. I think probably I won't, even with the boost. But since then, a bunch of creators have done really great, thoughtful content talking about the ramifications of the boost that I think are fair and worthwhile. I think what it does is it just reinforces my hypothesis that at its core, the part of Blizzard that makes World of Warcraft is a machine that listens to feedback and makes games based on that feedback. And I think when they make a player boost, they're responding to feedback. I think they're responding to the weird, degenerate behavior that players take to get the level up as soon as possible. Maybe they think it's going to have a negative effect on botting, although I think we all know by now that that won't be the case. And there's the big question mark of why Blizzard has so many bots in its game. A game that requires a subscription to play. I've seen a ton of content that suggests that Blizzard's actually incentivized to have bots. It's better for their bottom line if they allow it. I don't much like that idea, but it makes sense. Might be connected to the sweaty push culture to world first everything in Burning Crusade. Yeah, maybe. Let me see if I can say this in a way that's elegant and concise. It should not surprise people that the same company that transformed WoW Vanilla into WoW Shadowlands by listening to feedback and iterating over 15 years would turn classic WoW into what we're seeing with the meta container, the world buff meta container that they recently announced with the boost and all these other stuff. It's all in line. It's like the story of the tortoise and the scorpion. How's it go again? Let me read this. Tortoise and the scorpion. You'll know what I'm talking about? I don't think that 1% of the players ruin the game, Lex. I think that's a very boiled down way to look at it. I think it's about incentives. Oh, you're talking about people who make those sweeping generalizations. Yeah. Well, people are trying to figure this out, but they want an easy answer. And I am the enemy of easy answers. So you won't find one here. All right, here's the story. The scorpion and the tortoise. Never mind, I didn't find it. Oh, here it is. A scorpion wants to cross a river, but cannot swim. So it asks a frog to carry it across. The frog hesitates, afraid that the scorpion might sting. But the scorpion argues that if it did that, they would both drown. The frog considers the argument sensible and agrees to transport the scorpion. The frog lets the scorpion climb on its back and then begin its swim. Midway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog anyway, dooming them both. The dying frog asks the scorpion only why it stung, despite knowing the consequence. To which the scorpion replies, I couldn't help it. It's in my nature. Blizzard can't help it. It's in their nature. If you want to see a modern WoW classic get made, I wouldn't look to Blizzard to make it. Okay. Now we get to the uplifting part of this conversation. And the inspiration for this whole show. This is Gandalf appearing on the 5th day. This is liquid inspiration. Here we go. This is a Reddit post on the Classic WoW subreddit by dipotassium phosphate. It's not them. It's us. I want to be honest. I love this game to death. Vanilla WoW had a big impact on me during very formative years. And it's always held a special place in my heart. The large changes in the game over the years always left a bit of a void while I tried to recreate some of the most special moments in gaming, both with later expansions and with different games altogether. But of course, none of them held up, because the industry just doesn't make games the way they used to. And that's not a value judgment. That's not a, hey, remember how good stuff used to be? That's a statement of fact. Games produced today prioritize different things, engage with a different player base, and have been informed by over a decade of iteration in game design post-WoW. Game developers employ different systems than they used to, and games today are being produced by a different generation of developers with a different set of experiences who learn game design at a different time. I won't say today's games are worse than games back then, but they certainly are different. We'll likely never have another vanilla WoW because the industry just does not have people working today with the training, experience, and mindset to create a game in the same vein. The special sauce that produced vanilla WoW at the time it did was a perspective among game designers of that era that came from their unique experiences, which will never exist again. I'm not sure if I agree with this, but I understand it. That's why Classic was so huge for me. We won't get this anywhere else. Complain about the minor deviations all you want, but the game feels faithful to me. The mechanics are there. The quests are there. The world is there. And all the little things that private servers got almost, but not quite right. Enemy patrolling, quest drop rates, spawn locations, monster AI, they're there too. And Blizzard got almost all of them right. Well, these days I barely have time to play anymore, and when I do get a bit of extra time, nothing pleases me more than hopping on and getting a few levels. I'm not pushing progression. I have no time for that. I'm playing the way my 15-year-old self played back in the day. Leveling alts, doing the occasional dungeon, sometimes pushing the early and easy raid content, but overall enjoying the goofy charm of the game and its world. And it doesn't feel quite the same as it used to. The mechanics are there. The game feels correct. But there's something critical that's totally off. It's you guys. We're all complaining daily for Blizzard to uphold the values of the original game and try their best to continue to reproduce it faithfully. But the least faithful parts of the experience today are not at all in the hands of Blizzard. It's the community. It's the players that have unindustrialized the boosting mentality. Over half of the LFG chats and mages advertising mega pull boosting at a level never imagined in WoW's early days. And so many players are bringing up new alts this way, instead of getting out in the world and engaging with the leveling content. It's no wonder the only players we can find in the wild are bots. Everybody else is paying their way past it. And it's not surprising Blizzard's adding a boost to Burning Crusade. The community overwhelmingly wants it. We're boosting right now. The only difference is we're paying money to gold sellers for it in Classic. Yeah, back in the day we had power leveling. Maybe you'd convince your guildmate to run you through a few dungeons, or maybe you were one of the 0.5% of players in those mysterious and elite guilds that pushed progression, and the guild would rotate helping you level faster. To say those instances were the exception would be an understatement. They happen so rarely that players would gossip about the friend of a friend of a friend who heard one dude actually paid real money to get through 10 levels or so one time. I can attest to that. And the world buff meta? 100% the players. These world buffs were in vanilla. Practically nobody used them. Players from top guilds like DNT have acknowledged that back in the day, world buffs were either completely not on their radar or just not something they bothered with. Prolific figures in the community even fought back against Blizzard and successfully had content that was probably tuned with those world buffs in mind, nerfed to be clearable without them. Remember the famous Cthulhu is unkillable debacle? This shows how disinterested players back then were engaging in the ridiculous behavior that has become the norm in Classic. And botting? It existed back then. It's always existed. Today, it's on a scale that's absolutely dwarfs what was happening back then. And I 100% agree that it's on Blizzard to find better mechanisms to identify bots programmatically. I know it's a hard problem. I also know that there's talented people out there that specialize in exactly this sort of problem, identifying a pattern of bad behavior among a massive dataset and blocking it automatically with low false positive rates. Google manages to keep illegal content off of its search most of the time, because they're willing to pay the engineers that understand how to solve that problem. But what's not on Blizzard is how many players are buying huge sums of gold and pissing it away and stuff like GDKP. Once again, maybe this kind of behavior happened in between the cracks back in the day, but it was the overwhelming exception. The community at large didn't run GDKPs. They didn't even run pugs of any kind because they knew it would be a nightmare. They worked hard with their guildies to clear content earnestly, and that was the fun part. Even gold buying was not a hugely prolific thing back then. When rumors would spread about a guild cheating and buying gold, it would be a huge controversy among the community, not just a shrug and, yeah, they all do it. Like it or not, the bots are ultimately there because the player base is creating the incentive for them. The demand is massive, and we can harp on Blizzard all we want for not addressing the issue. But think about their perspective on the issue. When the data they have on the player base shows half or more of legitimate accounts are buying huge sums of gold, the anti-bot cries coming from the community feel disingenuous. Our collective behavior is clearly showing that the player base wants to buy gold. What can they do? Ban us all? Shut the game down and call it a failure? Nobody here is willing to take fault for enabling this sort of behavior. But how many of you have banded together over other members with your server community and decided you would take a stand against the world buff and GDKP and gold buying meta? Where in the community are we making that kind of behavior unwelcome? We all whined so hard before launch that we would not tolerate cross-realm play because we wanted that sense of realm identity and community. And not a server out there has cultivated a positive community or demonstrated good behavior at scale. That sense of realm community didn't prop up the game. It only served to distinguish which servers are the biggest cesspools of toxicity. It didn't feel like this back then, I promise you. World buffs aren't the problem. Bots aren't the problem. And drums won't be the problem in Burning Crusade. The problem will be the players and the sense of sheer entitlement they fostered for themselves. The least faithful part of Classic WoW is you guys. Stop passing the buck. An incredibly spicy hot take among a community of players who like to complain about this stuff but not do anything about it. I love this post, and I'll give you 2 reasons why. First, it does a very good job of clearly identifying what problem behaviors are causing people to are alienating some people from playing the game. Now, these problem behaviors are only a problem if you do them without enjoying them. There are people out there who do these things and love it. I think Lex, you're probably one of them, if you're still listening. The problem is people who do these things because that's what they believe they have to do, rather than doing it because it's what they want to do. Or rather than creating the community that they want to have the experiences they want. So that's the first thing. The second thing. One of the first things I thought when I read this is that this reads like a call to adventure. Are y'all familiar with this term? A call to adventure is the first step of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. What's the hero's journey? Well, I'm not well enough educated to explain that in detail, but I give you the Cliff's Notes. The hero's journey is a monomyth. It's essentially a storytelling structure that is used throughout mythical storytelling to talk about the great things that characters, real and imagined, have done. Heroes. And it basically is a structure for showing how to do things that are heroic. And this is the first step. This is having a call to adventure, a call to change something about the status quo. And when I read this, I asked myself, I wonder if anyone's going to hear this call and going to do something about it. Because I think most people, when they're in these situations of doing things that they don't like, are usually doing it because they're incentivized to do so. It's what they have to do to get loot. It's what they have to do to get a paycheck. It's what they have to do to get love and validation. And because of that, I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for people who are going through these experiences without enjoying them. And not everyone's cut out to be a hero. But M. Valencius, we're talking loosely about World of Warcraft. Loosely. this is a post that was posted on the classic World of Warcraft subreddit that basically tried to call out the community to hold them responsible for some of the degenerate things that are occurring within the game. Some of the epiphenomena that have resulted from having a more modern player base playing this game as opposed to the kind of player base that played it back in 2004 and 5. And I have a tremendous amount. I'm really inspired reading this, but I also have a lot of sympathy for the people he's calling out. And so I think what I have here to talk about is I want to explain what a call to adventure is. And I want to run through talking about the hero's journey to talk about what it could look like for someone to see something like this and do something about it. Understanding that most people who see this kind of a call to action will not act. Or they will start to act, but not actually have an impact on themselves or people around them at the end of the day. And I have a great video to sum that up. Nice snappy one. Let me pull it up. This is a TED Ed talk called What Makes a Hero, narrated by Matthew Winkler.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world.
The ordinary world in this case is world buff, meta hell, GDKP, mage boosting, etc.
But the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie.
So here's Call to Adventure. You see it right at the front. I'm not going to stop every single point along this path, but I do want to relate it back.
Does it follow this pattern? Status quo, that's where we start. 1 o'clock, call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock, assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock, departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. We're not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock, trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock, approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock, crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock, treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock, result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock, return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock, new life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely. But let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey.
I don't care about the Hunger Games. Um, 9 p.m. boomer bedtime. Night Lex. Bullseye. The truth is, in reality, hero can easily die, never be reborn. And in fact, someone who's trying to do something heroic can fail at any step along the way here. What I find really cool about this structure is it's a structure that's used to describe stories and the stories that we tell and the myths from different cultures. It's a structure that can be used to compare them to each other. Oh, not you. Word. But actually, there's usefulness in this structure, not just for understanding stories, but understanding stories about ourselves. Because the truth is, doing something heroic can have a large scale. Like in a movie, you can save the world. But there are also stories that are written on a small scale. And maybe the act of heroism that a character goes through isn't about saving the world. Maybe it's about reconciling their relationship with their parents. Maybe it's about finding peace with something about your past you're ashamed of or embarrassed about. Maybe it's about figuring out how to get animals to stop sniffing around your trash. It's about doing something that helps you as a person grow and has a benefit to yourself and to the world around you. And if you look at the post I just shared about World of Warcraft, about it's not them, it's us, the call to adventure is to find a way to change the culture of the classic community, to allow space for people who don't want a hardcore, degenerate, balls to the wall experience to breathe. And a real hero who goes through all these steps might be able to actually find some success or to create something. And there are a few examples I can think of. But before we get there, let's finish the video. It's not that much longer.
Template. When does Katniss Everdeen hear a call to adventure that gets the story moving? When her sister's name is called from the lottery. How about assistance? Is anyone going to help her on her adventure? Hey, Mitch. What about departure? Does she leave her ordinary world? She gets on a train to the capital. Okay, so you get the idea. What do you have in common with Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo? Well, you're human, just like them.
Yeah.
The hero's journey myth exists in all human cultures and keeps getting updated because we humans reflect on our world through symbolic stories of our own lives. You leave your comfort zone, have an experience that transforms you, and then you recover and do it again. You don't literally slay dragons or fight Voldemort, but you face problems just as scary. Joseph Campbell said, "In the cave you fear to enter lies the treasure you seek." What is the symbolic cave you fear to enter? Auditions for the school play? Baseball tryouts? Love? Watch for this formula in books, movies, and TV shows you come across. You will certainly see it again, but also be sensitive to it in your own life. Listen for your call to adventure. Accept the challenge. Conquer your fear and claim the treasure you seek. And then do it all over again.
Do it again, baby. Heroes die every day, bro. Those kinds of stories are dangerous because they are far from reality's hardness and unfairness. Yeah, I think we need to let go of the literal events of hero stories. Like the video mentioned, they're meant to be symbolic, not literal. So you don't literally have to fight and kill things, do something heroic, even though people in movies or video games might do it. Like I mentioned, these are symbols of your real life. When the video exhorts you to face your fears, to fight the dragon, it's not literally about a dragon fight. It's about confronting something that's difficult and personally challenging. I'll give you an example. And this is going to sound a little egotistical, but what I did when I saw this is I asked myself if I could relate to any part of this. And I think actually I found a little bit of a parallel with the journey that I took in the last year, starting to come online and do the podcast, the interview podcast that I've been doing. So for those who don't know, I'm Deeg, and I have a podcast I do where I interview developers, gamers, and streamers. And I started doing this a year ago because I wanted to get more out of gaming than I was able to get just by playing them. So let's fit Deeg of a year ago into this structure and see if there's any kind of a small hero story we can tell. First step, status quo. Status quo is I was a gamer who was playing games in his downtime and not having as much fun as I wanted to have, not getting satisfaction out of it. Step one, call to adventure. Actually, I had a really cool moment where I was hanging out and playing games with my buddy Taylor, and we were chatting, and I happened to be recording it just for testing purposes for some technology I was working on. And I went back and watched the recording and realized that our conversation might be interesting for others to listen to. And it got me started on the idea of maybe talking about games is a pathway to getting what I want out of them that I'm not getting out of just playing them. So that was the call to adventure. Assistance. I didn't have a mentor, any single person. I didn't have a Gandalf, but I had a bunch of figures who I looked up, whose advice had helped me in the past and while I was working on this, and people who I looked up to in terms of their work. Some names would include Lex Friedman and his podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast, some of Jordan Peterson's self-help stuff, Mighty Teapot, a Guild Wars streamer who has a Guild Wars 2 podcast that I really have enjoyed, and Day9, a former StarCraft competitive player and current streamer who embodies a lot of things I really admire. Look up to all these guys. Departure. So the special world for me could have been actually entering the world of doing podcasts, just starting. And I did that. Podcast number 1, it was like January 6th of 2020. Trials. So it was hard to keep up a cadence of doing these podcasts when no one was listening to them. And I did not know what I wanted to get out of it. I was trying so many different things in the early days. And for many months, I just kind of struggled along. Approach. Who is the big demon who approached? Well, I was approached by a very popular PlanetSide 2 YouTuber named Commander Sirius who wanted to appear on my podcast. And I had a crisis because that to me was a major moment of having to grow up and having to face a very intimidating conversation with someone who I already knew and respected. But I did it. I met the crisis, I got through it, and people saw and liked what I did. And I was able to make connections with other people and have a few other big interview podcasts that happened along the way. And as a result of that, I gained a small amount of recognition, especially in the PlanetSide and Guild Wars 2 communities, for being a commentator and a podcaster, which is something that was not the case before that. And at the end of the year, I took a break. I returned from the special world of doing podcasting to my normal world of just playing games. And here's where I can't find as clear connections, but new life, step 10. In truth, I looked at the last year and I looked at my current career, my day job, and I've been reevaluating things and revising my 5-year map of where I might want to go based on the meaning I've been getting out of going down this path. And at the start of this year, 2021, I did a retrospective, which could be step 11, the resolution, tying up of loose ends. Step 12 is the status quo, returning to a new status quo. Over the course of a year, I went from someone whose experience with games was based on being a gamer to someone who's based on being a podcaster. And that changed me for the better. I learned new skills and I connected with a lot of people and I grew a lot as a person. And I hope that it's been good for others too. That's just a little hero's journey. And in 2021, I'm starting a new one with this weekly Monday show. Y'all can let me know what you think about that. Okay. So, being a hero is not easy, especially when you're taking on big, difficult community problems. I solved the problem for me of not being satisfied being playing video games, but there's also bigger problems I'm engaged with. And this problem of it's not them, it's us is a very big problem. And most people won't be able to make an impact, even if they're interested and they hear the call to adventure. I want to talk about some of the mitigating circumstances that prevent people from acting in a way that's in their own long-term interest or that prevents them from going down this hero's path. A couple other ideas I got. It's a couple of short videos, so it's going to be less of me talking. Hopefully y'all will enjoy that. But before I do that, I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to refresh my beverage. I'll be right back. See you in a few. Wrong button. Bullseye says people end up being on drugs or alcoholics or suicide and shit. Everyday dragons. It's not easy. It's not fair. Grind doesn't necessarily win in the end. Yep. What's the saying that the only guarantees in life are suffering and death? Life's 100% fatal. And as operative, I've spent the past few years just generally rejecting what the gaming industry thinks I want out of games and playing them in your way. Have you had much luck finding others to play games with that way in this operative? Just curious. I really admire the attitude. But I think a very small group, that's really cool. That's an insanely valuable thing you found. Very hard to find the right people. I totally agree. And I think you could even argue that, like, one of the outcomes I'm hoping for by hopping on the mic, by streaming myself playing games, by doing the interview, is finding people like you, honestly, who want to engage with games in a more intentional fashion and who want to build a community and talk about games in a more thoughtful way. It's just hard to find people like that. And it's okay. Like, I think it's good. I think in a lot of ways, it's more personally valuable and interesting to have a small group of people who recognize the same values than to be part of a large community of faceless people who all do the same thing. Bullseye, now you can explain to me having people become more demanding by games or games are getting worse. People become more demanding by games or games are getting worse. I think people are getting more demanding as a consequence of the change in technology that's allowed us to have more communication. Before, it was harder to make demands on games, literally. The feedback cycle was longer and lower resolution. Now you have people hopping on streams day one and saying everything they love and hate about a game for 15,000, 25,000 people. That's a new phenomenon. It's transformative to the way games are made. But I think on the whole, games are getting better over time. I think that they're getting better at a slower rate than people are getting demanding. Your insights align with mine. It draws you here. Well, I'm glad I've reached at least a few people in this operative, yourself included. I honestly still doubt every single day when I write up these shows. I'm like, is anyone going to give a shit about this? And especially, this is an especially fraught day because it's the first day in weeks I'm not talking about Planet Sign. and I'm not in the planet-side category, and I have a small niche there that I'm scared to let down. But at the end of the day, I have to talk about what floats my boat. Otherwise, you're going to get a fake Deeg. Bullseye, is that impression satisfying to your request? Yeah, stick to your guns, man, or you'll lose yourself. Fucking Ben. And I realize that what I'm doing is not like the best version of what it could be. Like ideally, I'd be able to shrink these ideas down to like something that's digestible. And I would have like 5, 10, 15-minute videos on my YouTube alongside doing regular stream content. But it turns out that making video is insanely hard and time consuming and not something I'm good at. So the hope is I can find enough people who like long form content to actually engage with these ideas. You don't say, yeah. Like the that video I played at the start of this show that I made a couple years ago talking about WoW Classic, which actually, if you search for "you think you do but you don't" on YouTube, it's in like the first 3 or 4 results. So this video is constantly pulling in new views. It's the most watched thing on my channel. So funny. But it took me like 10, 12 hours of effort to make that video. From having the idea to make it to actually getting it done. And it's just a 5-minute video. I think a next iteration for me will be to try to make content by filming myself offline talking to the camera and trying to stitch together something that works. So I think I might take the whole talk I did about my WoW takeaways as a standalone video. But I don't know, I got to take time off work to find the time for that or something. It really interests me to do. But anyway, let's yes, but it's weird how games have become more and more good. People are getting less and less satisfied. Yeah. I also think a lot of people who play games aren't aware of how much better they were many years ago. I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy for people playing these games. I think one of the main things that distinguishes me from a lot of other people who talk about gaming communities is even though I try to hold communities accountable for stuff, I have a fundamentally humanistic, sympathetic point of view towards toxic behaviors, towards degenerate behaviors. And actually, that dovetails nicely into what I'm about to talk about. So this first video is a little dense, but I'm going to trust y'all to be smart enough to hang with me on it. And it's actually it's the same person who we heard from, was it last week? It was the week I did the motivated reasoning talk. And it's Julia Galiff. So last time I brought Julia Galiff to the show. I played a 11-minute TED talk she did about her idea of soldier mode and scout mode, which I'll spend a couple sentences giving an overview of to lay the foundation for this point. She conceptualizes soldier mode as a way of reasoning defensively. That when you see an idea or an argument, you see it as a reflection of whether it reinforces your beliefs or denies your beliefs. And if it denies your beliefs, you attack it. If it reinforces it, you embrace it and defend it. Like you're being a soldier on the front lines. Scout mode is the idea that your job isn't to be defensive, your job is to report the truth. And she espouses reasoning in scout mode because it's about seeing what's true and updating your understanding based on what you observe. Here she's going to talk about some mitigating circumstances that prevent people from accepting and incorporating the truth. And I think that this is going to be instructive in understanding why people do GDKP, why people buy gold, and why people enslave themselves to the world buff meta, even if they hate it. And it's about the power of incentives.
So I'm sure you're already familiar with the power of incentives in shaping people's behavior in general. If you want to increase your sales, you can offer your salespeople a big commission. They'll try harder to make more sales. In general, the greater the payoff people get from doing something, the more they'll be willing to do it. And incentives don't have to be purely material. You can incentivize people with respect or attention. That's why people strive for heroism in war or for fame as an actor. It's mostly not the money. So you know about how incentives work in general. The new piece that I'm adding here is that incentives don't just shape how you behave, they shape what you believe and how you think. So you might have heard the saying from journalist Upton Sinclair, quote, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it." That's a
I just want to pause on that. That's a great quote. I'm going to repeat that.
The new piece that I'm adding here is that incentives don't just shape how you behave, they shape what you believe and how you think. So you might have heard the saying from journalist Upton Sinclair, quote, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it." That's a case of incentives putting people in soldier mode. To take a concrete example, let's say you're a scientist being funded by a pharmaceutical company. You have a strong incentive to believe and to conclude in your research that their drugs are effective and safe. And indeed, papers whose authors were employed by drug companies are 22 times less likely to find anything negative about the drug compared to independent scientists. And I'm sure the vast majority of the scientists aren't consciously lying. They're not consciously committing fraud. It's just there's a bunch of choices that you have to make in designing a study about which hypotheses to test, which outliers, which data to exclude from your analysis.
So there's a lot of academic language here because that's what Julia Galos' background is. She's going to relate the idea of incentives back to academics. But I think that incentive has a huge amount of power outside of academics in everyday life and in the way people play games. I think especially in the way that people form meta, like the whole idea of a meta is based on incentives.
When to rerun an analysis to see if it still holds up. And in the course of making all those choices, you have a lot of freedom, even unconscious freedom, to fish for the conclusion that you want or avoid the conclusion that you don't. So a corollary of this is that if you change people's incentives, their level of intellectual honesty will change as well. If the payoff for being accurate is big enough, it can even outweigh existing incentives that people have to self-deceive. For example, one study asked people questions that were factual but politically charged. So like, has unemployment increased or decreased since Obama took office? And unsurprisingly, people's answers were strongly partisan. Republicans gave answers that were flattering to Republicans. Democrats gave answers that were flattering to Democrats.
Soldier mode. You reason in a way that is defending your existing beliefs or defending the existing meta in gaming terms.
But then the experimenters offered participants a monetary incentive to be accurate. For each correct response, they would get a ticket, a raffle ticket, to win a $200 Amazon gift card. Lo and behold, it turned out people actually knew the answers. Incorrect responses went down by 50%. This is the same principle behind the idea that a bet is a tax on bullshit.
Bullseye, 99% is soldier mode. Yep. I think it's actually higher than 99%, to be honest. And that's one of the main things I am trying to do, is be a lonely scout in the wilderness looking for truth. I love this insight that she just shared about bets being a tax on bullshit. Put your money where your mouth is. It's fantastic. And what it does is it provides you an incentive with acting in a way that's likely to be true. Betting on a horse race, something like that, or just a cool saying.
You might have heard before. you can see this principle in action when often someone will make like a confident claim, like there's no way the Democrats could lose, or there's no way this ideal will work. And then if you offer to bet with them, like offering that, basically inviting them to put their money where their mouth is, suddenly they shift back towards scout mode and realize, maybe I'm not as confident in this claim as I thought I was. That's like the satisfying resolution. The unsatisfying resolution is when they still double down but still refuse to bet for you for unspecified reasons. It's maddening. But you can notice this in yourself.
So this is an interesting thing. And it's just kind of a meta observation about watching some of Julia's interactions, is that she seems to be quite, I've seen her get frustrated and flustered a couple times in her talks, especially when fielding responses. And my observation is that she really, I haven't really thought this through enough. I'm going to pull that one back. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm right about that. Let's just continue the video.
Like, if you say something that seems true to you in the moment, and then someone asks, like, would you bet with me, at even odds about that? Or you can even ask yourself, like, would I be willing to wager money, on this? Often you'll notice that your level of confidence shifts, or you, like, suddenly realize, like, there are actually a bunch of ways that could, like, fail to happen, and I'm like, I wouldn't actually wager a lot of money on that. So the incentives that I've been discussing so far are all external incentives. They're money or prestige or your job or social approval. But these aren't the only kinds of incentives that affect us. There are also internal incentives.
This one's for you, NS Operative.
Emotional rewards or punishments doled out by your own brain. Enjoyment, satisfaction, pride, frustration, boredom. These are all powerful incentives that shape our behavior and our thinking just as much as money or social approval do. The reason that you devote hours to that video game isn't because you're going to get paid a lot of money or get the adulation of fans online, unless you're like a popular streamer. It's because you find the experience intrinsically enjoyable, and you know that you'll feel a lot of satisfaction when you finally beat it. So that also means that one of the most important determinants of whether you're more in soldier or scout mode is, are you internally incentivized to face reality? And that can break down in a lot of ways. Are you able to contemplate the possibility of failure calmly, or does the mere thought terrify you and send you into like a despair spiral? Do you feel guilty when you disagree with your political or ideological tribes or not?
All right, that's what I wanted to show off in that talk. NS Operative, I have the Nazjatar crab mount. It was a pain in the ass to get, but it was a worthy achievement. Incentives are super important, y'all. Actually, ever since I saw this, I've been reinterpreting a lot of the behaviors that I see online, especially from people who seem to be misbehaving strangers, and asking myself about what their incentives might be to act in those ways. I actually want to pull back up that post, that it's not them, it's us, and apply the idea of incentives to a couple of the complaints that were made in it. Again, these are reasonable reasons why a person could observe degenerate behaviors and do nothing about it, because they might be incentivized not to. So let's find a couple of examples. And I hope you all will all understand that when I say these things, I am an explorer on unmapped seas. I'm not a professional. I am at my core, I am a curious gamer who is unsatisfied with the answers that are out there and with the level of discourse that exists in platforms like these. I'm trying to create the thing that I want to see. So I'm likely to get a few things wrong along the way, and I will try to correct it as we go. Okay, here we go. Industrializing the boost mentality. boost mentality. Why would players be incentivized to boost? This is a simple one. Because the thing that's of social value at this point in World of Warcraft is being in a position to play endgame content. And there's no incentive. There's no social incentive to play through the pre-endgame content. So incentives are created at this point in the game in such a way that people will want to get through the content as quickly as possible, hence boosting. Over half of the LFG chat menus advertising mega pool boosting at a level never imagined. It's not surprising whether it's adding a boost to Burning Crusade. The community wants it. Yes. So if you create a game that has a massive wall of leveling before people can start acting against the social incentives they have to play cooperatively, then they're going to look for ways to get through it, and they're going to ask for ways to get through it more quickly. And you can see that reflected in the design of modern WoW retail, like we talked about. The leveling experience in WoW retail is not fun. It's not meaningful. There's nothing about it that's good. They have allowed this crowd who wants to boost to really, in a way, dominate the way that experience is designed over time. And this operative saw this boosting commercial on YouTube once where someone was smiling watching TV with their girlfriend while their character was getting boosted. He just stared in disbelief. Yeah. Well, if you see the barrier to getting the payoff you have as an onerous thing, and you cannot or are not interested in piloting and trying to make lemons from lemonade. So if you, sorry, I said that backwards, make lemonade from lemons. If you look at the leveling up process in World of Warcraft as a lemon, the way you make lemonade for it is to enjoy the leveling process. And the way you enjoy the leveling process is by turning off your engagement in the end game stuff. You don't look at things like best in slot lists. You don't watch world firsts. You just focus on the experience that's in front of you, maybe with a few friends if you're lucky. And that's how you can enjoy that. If you torture yourself with the meta and with being the best, then you're going to create an internal incentive to want to boost. And it's natural to do this, actually. World buff meta, that's next. So, if you have a way to play the game that allows you to be 3 times as powerful as you would otherwise be, but it requires you to play in a little bit of a weird way. I mean, being more powerful is an insane incentive. It's basically the main incentive that makes World of Warcraft work. The idea of getting better gear, better loot. World buffs existing? I don't blame players for wanting to get world buffs, because the entire way the game is designed suggests to you that you should care about your power level. And if you can become a superhero by going through this process, this esoteric process, then of course you're going to do it. And you're going to follow the community guides to do it, so that when you show up in the raid, you can rank on the DPS meters. That's important. People care about that. It's not just about hitting a minimum bar so you can be part of the club. It's also about just like what you care about. If you're playing a DPS character and you get low DPS because you're the only person up with world buffs, not only are you going to be bummed about being low DPS, but there's going to be social side effects of that. People are going to look at you as a player who doesn't care about your performance, and they're going to preferentially choose other players over you who care about playing well and who are willing to put in the time. Not getting world buffs in modern WoW Classic is seen as being lazy, not as being purist. There are guilds for every player here. Lex with the actually high quality retort. Lex, let me ask you a question as a world buffer. When you do your world buffs, do you feel like you do them because you're trying to keep up with the Joneses? Or is it the kind of thing that you would want to do to max your performance out because that's part of your internal incentive? That's part of what you're motivated to do when you play the game. You just want to push it as far as you can. And that by itself is enjoyable. I suspect it's the latter case for you. Not that you're just doing it to keep up with others. So I think you're actually there's another video I'm going to show here in a few minutes that I think describes that phenomenon a little bit. So players are incentivized to boost. They're incentivized to do the world buffs. Botting. Okay. That's what you would do anyway. Number 2 reason is warrior scaling. Number 3 is a community that you play in. Yeah. So you are a person who has like-minded people you play with who actually having the world buffs arguably makes the game more interesting and higher quality than not. Because it's not necessarily about meeting the minimum bar of beating the content. It's about holding yourself to the highest standard accountable. I mean, holding yourself accountable to the highest standard possible. And that's what's interesting to you. Now, that phenomenon that you fall in, that group that you fall into, Lex, is a niche. But the interesting thing are the epiphenomena that result from it of creating a meta that other players unwillingly follow. And I think that's the real phenomenon that this post is responding to. Hey, Nickhots. How's it going? People want world buffs at this point to clear faster or to make content that may be cutting edge for them easier. Content is a solved equation. It's a 15-year-old game. You get them to go in and smash it and have fun. Yeah. Okay, bots. So buying gold and GDKP. Again, incentives. When botting exists and there are RMT money sites and people can get away with buying gold and they can use that gold to buy gear and you're incentivized to improve the power level of your character. Again, people are just following basic incentives when they engage in these behaviors. So how do I relate the idea of the hero's journey and my establishment of this post as a call to adventure, people who want to change things, back to what we're talking about now about incentives? And I think if you see this as a call to adventure for people who are reluctantly engaging in these behaviors, not excitedly engaging in them like you, Lex, but reluctantly, people who feel dominated by these phenomena, by these metas. It's a call to adventure for those people to try to find another way to play. I'm going to give you a good example of someone who did exactly that. I actually interviewed him last year, and his name is Cargos. Cargos is a WoW Classic streamer who got to the end game and pushed it as hard as he could. He multi-boxed, he had multiple accounts, he was doing world buffs, and he freaking hated it. He hated how degenerate it felt. And so he pulled back and he created a different experience. He worked with other people to create a community of players who played WoW Classic in a hardcore fashion. And what that means is they create Iron Man characters who try to level up as high as possible without dying at all. And they run periodic competitions where you have 8 hours to level up as high as you can without dying, either as a singleton or as a duo or whatever. And there's a whole community of people who have flocked to that way to play the game. Because what you get out of that is an actual engagement with the leveling experience that normally you're trying to skip. It's a really interesting and heroic way to approach this problem. Not for everyone, but it meets the criteria of a heroic action and payoff. I think it's super cool. What else? I think that's it for the incentives. Yeah. Okay. And here's what I wanted to establish. The connective tissue between this call to adventure, the hero's journey, and incentives. And what I want to suggest is that people who can change themselves and the world around them for the better are those who are able to. This is an idea I'm working on. I'm not sure if this is correct. Call it a hypothesis. The people who do that, who are willing to, who actually can do things like the hardcore cup, like the Planetside Forever project is another good example, Nick, are people who are willing to sacrifice things that they're incentivized to do by the world around them in order to make a change for the better. And an ability to overcome these incentives that are described here is required in order to be able to find a different way for individuals, and if you do it right, for others. You're putting hardcore characters into Project N. Yeah, hardcore is a really cool application of any MMO. All right, this is going to be good. Lex, I'm going to read your commentary on cargoes. He's a limited example of a group of a community that, instead of whining about the perceived in-group of people who are having fun with the way they do things in game, actually go out and put themselves in a community that correlates to how they want to enjoy the game. But at the end of the day, it sure is easier just to whine about world buffs and people who min-max. Actually, I have nothing to respond to there. I'm glad I read that out loud because I totally agree with every word of it. Absolutely. And going back to like my own little ego trip, where I talked about the progress I've made in the last year as a kind of mini example of a hero's journey. It would have been easier for me to just chill out and play video games rather than make a podcast, rather than make a weekly show. I got to tell you, like, I have lost anywhere from like 8 to 16 hours a week of gaming that I used to be able to do by doing this stuff. And that's painful for me because it only leaves me with, I don't know, like maybe 5 to 10 hours a week where I get to play games. I probably spend as much time talking games as I do playing games these days. And it's a tough sacrifice for me because I actually love games and you have to play them. But it's one I'm willing to make to do this. Nick, I hate min-maxing and the gatekeeping that surrounds it when it's absolutely not needed. Like for Burning Crusade Classic, not bringing good melee players despite the guild not pushing for world firsts. Get a different guild. Min-maxing is fine if you're pushing for those achievements, you think. Yeah. You have to give your guilds going world first. Well, it's easy to feel that way, Lex, to be fair, because of the way that social media works and amplifies the achievements and interests of the people who are the most invested. It normalizes the top end, which is an effect that I think people are not as aware of as they should be. I think it'd be better to say, Nick, that casual DKP guilds incentivized min-max. Hey, Van. Nice to see you dropping in here. Thanks for the resub. It's a community mentality more than any guild, right? And that's why I'm suggesting, Nick, that overcoming the incentives of those communities to do something different is hard to do. Even if it's just finding another community, because it can be painful to leave a community behind where there are things you like about it, but that community has incentives that are bad for you. I'm actually going through this in my day job right now. Let's see if I can say this in a way that doesn't screw me. The bonus structure at my company is changing in a way that completely changes the incentives to the way that I work. And I'm going from a mode where I'm going to be incentivized, where I was incentivized for pulling off big accomplishments on the team, and moving big rocks because I was being assessed by my manager. And in the future, I'm going to be assessed for my bonuses based on the number of hours I build. So the quality of the work, the big accomplishments I have won't mean anything in my future bonuses, only the number of hours I work. Incentives are important. And the easiest thing for me to do is to obey those incentives. And the hard thing for me to do is going to be to cut bait from that structure and either fight it or find a new one. Bullseye, I have big problems that you only hear people who complain because people who actually have fun don't go on forums talk about it. True. And this operative, most people who leave the game instead of finding a community, then all the game is left 99% of one kind of community. I think that's true too. Because it is actually hard. It's hard to find the right community, and it's even harder to create one. I mean, I might have stayed playing Classic and Shadowlands both if I had been able to find a community that was really perfect for me. But the time it was going to take to do that, casuals don't have thousands of gold to drop on bid items. Lex and Nick, my perception is that y'all are just having a disagreement about vocabulary. But maybe I'm wrong. Anyway. Okay. So this is good. Why else? So let's add one more level of examination of why people do things that they don't like in video games. Yeah, what if your good friends are in one of those communities? That's a trick, Nick. It's one more bit of reason why incentives don't always align for you to do the thing that's fun to you. The tough thing is, what are you going to do about it? So let's hear our favorite guy, our favorite WoW commentator is about to re-enter the stream. Here we go.
Create.
Everyone say hello to Kevin Jordan. You don't need to be kind to each other in the chat. Okay, let me break this down. So Nick is complaining, or maybe not complaining, maybe pointing out some things about the game and the community that's difficult. And Lex is saying, just find a new community. Just make the thing you want. Just be the hero, man. Make the experience you want. So yeah, I think that there's some fairness to that, Lex, but also I think there's fairness to what Nick is saying, that it's not easy to just do that. And Lex, to be fair, the way you play the game happens to be one that's culturally accepted and where there are well-established communities that do exactly what you like. It might be harder for someone like Nick or someone else to find a community of people who play the game they want to play it than it is for you. Does that sound fair? Okay, we're listening to Kevin Jordan ask the question, are you a meta slave? This is, we're going to play about 10 minutes of this, and it's going to be relevant, I hope.
Hello, and welcome to Failure and Analysis. My name's Kevin Jordan. I'm here to talk about another thing that's been interesting to me, is how people play the game.
Who's Kevin Jordan? Probably most of y'all who watch my content know this, but he was one of the original designers on World of Warcraft Vanilla. He worked on the team up through either Wrath of the Lich King or Cataclysm, not sure which. And for the last couple of years, he's been streaming on Twitch and talking about how modern games are bad compared to WoW Vanilla.
How it relates to being a meta slave, and what kind of experiences MMOs should offer, and how it's been difficult for people to connect with those experiences because of the meta, right? Or
All right.
the perceived.
We gotta wait on this. We gotta talk through this thing going on in the chat. Okay. Lex says, every way to play the game is culturally accepted. You can play however you want on any server. Don't want a world buff? Join a non-world buff guild. Friends play in a guild where you don't like the way they play? Play a healer and click raid frames. Don't worry about the world buffs. But it's not fun to be around their guild. Yeah. So Lex, what you're saying is that you can have what you want if you give up some things. Like maybe Nick wants to play a DPS character with his friends in a non-world buff guild. But maybe he can't have all three of those things. So he's got to give up one thing in order to get the experience he wants. You're right, Lex. Like, he could do that. But Nick, it's also right for Nick to point out that ideally he wouldn't have to. I'm a big proponent of making the experience you want. I think that's pretty clear in the through line of this discussion. And I think what you're pointing out, Lex, is the right way, but I think it's also not fair to suggest that it's straightforward or easy to do that. I don't think it's straightforward or easy. And that's operative. Lex would argue that to solve being poor, you make more money. It's true, but lacks substance. That boils it down a little bit. I don't know if Lex is always that way. I just think that particular argument is true, but perhaps not sufficient. A lot of highbrow gamers in the chat tonight. Lex, that's who I attract. This is highbrow game discussion only. I'll have you know. As I sip diet soda from a mug. Are we ready to listen to Kevin Jordan, folks? Feeling okay? Should we try this again?
Hello and welcome to Failure and Analysis. My name's Kevin Jordan. I'm here to talk about another thing that's been interesting to me, is how people play the game, how it relates to being a meta slave, and what kind of experiences MMOs should offer, and how it's been difficult for people to connect with those experiences because of the meta, right? Or the perceived way people should play the game. So, and this sort of all came up from a discussion that started on my Discord, from one of my viewers, Talsaroma, and he basically asked, where would I take retail, essentially? Like, how much would I go back to Classic, and would that work? Like, if my motivation were to push retail towards Classic, what would that do to the current audience, and how, and essentially how would my design change for a 2020 MMO based on the way people now play games, which a lot of people would argue has changed significantly from back in 2004 when vanilla was released. So to me, it's a fascinating discussion, and I wanted to get into some of the details of that question. I struggled with it because it's not one that's easy to answer on, especially on Discord. It's a very complicated answer. Let's go. But I'm going to throw out some of my thoughts that I've sort of collected over the past few days about this. So one of the points that Talsaroma makes is because people know the journey, they will find the best way to get to 60 or get their BIS gear, etc. Let me just show you my Discord. Our culture nowadays is always doing the most efficient way to get to max level, aka the meta. Like, we as a community have changed so much, and truthfully, I don't see how an MMO with Vanilla's design philosophy will even work nowadays. The only way to make the world feel dangerous and encourage grouping is two ways. And then he has a couple ideas on that. But so mostly what I want to talk about is this assumption right here, that players have changed over the years. And I dispute this pretty frequently on my channel. And
Kevin is so valuable to me because he so frequently says stuff that I don't agree with on the surface, but he has well-developed explanations for them. It's very valuable to listen to a high-quality argument you disagree with, because it will help you update your model. It'll help you make what you think more robust, or change your mind. But I love Kevin for this. He's such an antagonist, I think, in many ways. A devil's advocate.
And I'll kind of go into why, but a lot of it has to do with the game design. The game design of retail encourages fast play. It encourages that very sort of action-oriented, get in, get out, complete your journey, get to max level as fast as possible, get on that raid track, get your
When was this recorded? July 2020. So this is after Classic WoW came out and the World Buff meta was a thing. Okay.
Get your gear score up as high as it'll go. Get your Raider IO score as high as it can go. And what's the best way to do that? There's probably an efficient way to do it and several inefficient ways to do it. And so how to do that is go scour the internet for ways, for people that have made videos, and discuss the most efficient ways to do it, and then copy those, right? And that essentially creates what people call a meta and how you should behave, right? And then the expectation is that you know the meta and you follow the meta, and otherwise we're not interested in you because you don't know how to play the game efficiently, right? And so this creates this concept of meta slavery, right? You can't do what you want because you have to do the efficient thing and you have to do the meta thing. Otherwise, you're an undesirable in the community, and we don't have time to educate / carry you right through these experiences. So, that's the game design. That's a game design element that encourages that kind of behavior. And the difference between, I think, retail and classic is classic also encouraged that behavior, but for a smaller section or subsection of the community, because there were a lot of ways to play the game that didn't involve racing through the content that were just as enjoyable. Whereas I think that those things are missing more from the retail experience, right? Back in Classic, you could run around just picking flowers, right, for forever. And if that was fun, great. And the game encouraged you to do just that. And so there was a wider variety of experiences available, and you could sort of find your niche. And some of that meant, being a meta slave, and a lot of it didn't, right? So you could kind of go do your own thing. And it was much more experimental, and everyone was sort of, obviously it was new and fresh, which we had a distinct advantage. But this idea that everyone now behaves as a meta slave, I think is partially due to the game design, but still also something that I think people believe actually exists more than it does, right?
So I'm just going to throw in one idea there. So Kevin suggests that people haven't changed. And I think he's technically right, to say that people haven't changed. But I think sometimes when folks say people have changed, it's used as a shorthand to say that the way people behave has changed. And it's changed not because of people, it's changed because of the technology we have and the platforms we have. But he couldn't get 1802 without being Venthyr for Condemn on his warrior, wouldn't even get invites. Yeah. Yeah, I got up to, I think I got to 1600. I was playing Kyrian warrior. But then again, I wasn't playing with strangers, I was playing with my friends. Yeah. So people haven't changed, that technology has. I think that's one thing that Kevin never really addresses in his commentary. And so I just wanted to add that in.
And the people I usually interact with are people on Twitch, and for many of you, they're people on message boards and Reddit and game forums and things like that. And I can tell you that that group of people is already a really hardcore population, right? So they're much more likely to engage in this type of meta behavior as opposed to people that don't take the game so seriously that they go to websites and they're on Twitch all the time and they're watching YouTube videos and commenting, right? There's still a lot of people that just jump into a game and try to experience it fresh and blind and don't know what to expect and are just looking to have a good time. And one of the dangers I see of today's design is that person isn't being designed for anymore. That's what I worry.
That person isn't being designed for anymore. That's an interesting idea. I think it's probably incomplete. Maybe he'll elaborate on it, but I think there's definitely truth in that suggestion.
There's a lot of things in the game that are now assuming that you are playing at that high level and you're scouring the internet for all the secrets and everything else. And so the design doesn't create opportunities for people to be surprised by secret things or hidden things or strange interactions that are sort of between spells and items, for example, that are interesting and compelling that they may not have experimented with because they've already gone to do their simming and read the message boards to figure out the best way to do things. So but I think that's again, I think it's I think we believe, many of us believe it happens more than it actually does, and that the danger there is the design that caters to that and that alone is going to deprive people in that other group from having their own fun, natural, blind experience. The other part of this is we tend to believe that everyone behaves like we do sometimes. Like if I'm hardcore, we sort of see the world through that lens and expect everyone else is trying to be hardcore just like we are, but they're not as good at it. Or maybe occasionally we'll accept that somebody's better at it than us, but and I don't think that's true. I think that's a dangerous assumption, and it's certainly a dangerous assumption for designers to make. The other thing people do is they assume everyone is in a different group that behaves differently than they are, or that they do. Like everyone in this game is casual. The game is made for only casuals, so I don't like this game. That's another dangerous assumption. So the thing I would caution is try not to believe that everyone behaves a certain way, because there are many types of gamers, and they're all looking for a different experience. And I think a game, especially like an MMO, that caters to many different types of players and provides various experiences is going to do really well in terms of long-term social connection, which is really important for a game like an MMO.
Yeah.
Rather than everyone sort of having to be super efficient achiever type, that's paying attention to the meta. Another thing about the meta is...
Yeah, that's where I feel like Shadowlands missed me. There's just not a lot of room in Shadowlands to be kind of chill, feels like. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, by the way, Lex. Which two things? I don't necessarily agree with everything Kevin's saying here, by the way. That's not why I play stuff on my channel. It's to incorporate their argument into ours.
And they're all looking for a different experience. And I think a game, especially like an MMO, that caters to many different types of players and
community and playing well.
provides
I agree,
various
Lex.
experiences is going to do really well in terms of long-term social connection, which is really important for a game like an MMO, rather than everyone sort of having to be super efficient achiever type, that's paying attention to the meta. Another thing about the meta is it's still changing, right? Like this Diamond Flask thing that I've got up here on the list or on the screen. This is still kind of newish. I imagine some people were aware of it, but this thing now is sort of taking hold, which tells me two things. One, there are still people experimenting, which is a good thing. Not everyone, essentially, is just convinced that the meta is stable, it's solved, and everyone should just follow the existing knowledge, right? There are still people out there experimenting. That's an amazing thing, and that excites me. And I would encourage more people to experiment, right? This is the thing about being a meta slave that I don't like, is this idea that everything is solved and you don't have to do any work or shouldn't do any work. I think that's a very...
I'm going to push back on this idea for a second. And it's actually interesting to me because I could have sworn that I've seen another video by Kevin Jordan where he talks about this phenomenon. Because the people who actually find stuff like this out aren't your average dude who's playing for fun. It's actually the people who are already playing at the top end and understand the meta. And to understand the meta takes a lot. Most people just follow the meta. To improve the meta, you have to understand it and evangelize what you suggest. And it takes a tremendous amount of competence. It's only really for the top high-end players. It's for the heroes of the community who are not just following but are creating new things. And it's not something everyone can or should aspire to in a game like World of Warcraft, I don't think. I think Kevin's missing an important dimension here. Most of the innovation you see is in the speedrunning meta, right? People who want to speedrun are the people who find those efficiencies and find the new techniques and the new items that have surprising effects. Because if you're just playing the game for fun, if you stumble into one of these things, even if you find a really beautiful efficiency that no one else has understood before, the likelihood of you applying it in a way that's going to have an effect that people are going to care about is low, because you're not doing speedrunning. I don't think speedrunning's bad, Lex. Man, Lex, you seem to always find yourself in these positions where you're playing a hated class of top level. You're in a hated class of top level players. I think it's not easy being you. But I think I understand that that's not easy. And what you want from these games is fine. And you don't have to set an example for the way others should play. And I understand why you would feel bitter about others looking to you for an example when the thing you're just doing is playing the game the way you like, and you think everyone else should do the same thing, which I think is fair. Not bitter, just annoying. Okay, fair enough. Maybe I overplayed my hand there a little bit. Anyway, I think I only have another 2 minutes marked in this conversation. So let's finish out, because we're not playing this whole video. Just the intro part of it.
Fun potential experience for a lot of people is trying different things. And so when you fall in line as a meta slave, it makes you lazy because you don't feel like you have to come up with any like ideas on your own and be creative, and you're essentially just waiting for the meta to, the meta news or whatever to tell you what to do next, and you're depriving yourself of a fun experience. So I think it's important that people realize that the meta is still evolving and they should experiment. You guys should be out there experimenting and trying to find things that no one saw and no one thought of and no one experimented with, because it can be a fun part of the process. And the group or the people that figured out this diamond flask thing, like anything that hits the meta in an interesting way, they're getting to have experiences that are really exciting, which is, oh man, I informed the meta in some way. And that could be you, right? Like if you go out there and you're creative and try different things and push the boundaries, then you could make your, sort of make your way as one of those people that
as a hero,
help define this stuff, which can be very rewarding and very fun.
To embark on the hero's journey.
It's another reason not to be
to create the new meta.
And okay, so having set the stage, I want to.
Okay, so he's setting the stage to do a react video to a Lazy Peon video, which we're not going to watch. And I think that there's a little bit of context here to explain his remarks, which is that this video he's about to watch is a video of Lazy Peon enjoying an MMO because he's playing it without any prior knowledge of the game. And that's one of the big experiences that Kevin really endorses, is the fresh experience of playing an MMO game. And he wants to be sure that gamers and developers don't forget that there are still people who play that way. And despite the power of the tools we have to communicate and share knowledge, there are people, in fact, maybe perhaps a significant number of people, who play the game without any of them. And to not leave them behind just to appease the ever-increasing demands of the visible and invested. I think that's his overall message here. But, okay, let's look at some comments, and I'm going to relate this back. And this operative, I don't think WoW has a lot of experimentation for the individual, but from a crowd size perspective, it's much more viable. And yeah, you made a good point also, Lex. I think you said about it's a 15-year-old game. I think that's one thing he's not honoring. And also, I want to point out, the Diamond Flask was part of the meta in vanilla. Like, Kevin, you designed vanilla. You were there, right? I played a vanilla warrior, and Diamond Flask was a meta item because you can get to sync up with your cooldowns. Like, this is not a classic thing. Unless I'm missing something about the Diamond Flask. Lex, you can check me on that. Lex says a big part of meta evolving from private to classic was primarily because classic behaved differently in a lot of aspects. Whether it be mechanics, bugs, or whatnot, private server tuning to classic, right? Yeah, and a lot of people, so someone mentioned this. Oh, it was in that thread. It was in the thread that begat this whole line of thinking. That private servers all had little knickknacks and things that were not accurate, or that were not the same as they were in classic. So yeah, you have to update your meta, even if you have an established one. But even so, just the fact that this was a game designed to be mysterious to people in 2004, and it's. I think you could even start with a blank slate for this game, and you would still have the same community dynamics in place by now as you would have if you started with perfect knowledge. It's not a question of whether you get there, it's a question of how long it takes. And I think that the power of collaboration and the interest of people too. The incentives line up in such a way. If you're a streamer of the game, if you're a min-maxer, to find these things, the incentives are so strong that you cannot help but find and pursue these games if you're motivated in a certain way. And if you're someone who just follows, who watches these person's YouTube content, watches these streamers, who reads the guides, you can't help get excited about getting there too. And we're humans all learn by imitation. And who should we imitate other than the people who are the most successful among us? It's hard to find out what works for you. Comments. NS Operative was trying to experiment with a crit heavy prot warrior, but it would take maybe 2 to 3 months of play to actually get a build together to see if it actually worked. You're going to icy veins your spec, then interpolate that to fit your needs, and at least know that your base build would not suck in general content. Yeah, interesting. Lex, I think he's more referring to the idea of warriors having a complete set for healing during encounters via item rack swapping. Okay. I think people knew the active trinket strength bonus of it aligning with cooldowns, but people were horrible with these anyway back in the day. Big true. But this healing utility is a lot more from private server than for... I didn't even know about that, Lex. So you've educated me on something I didn't even know. Why are people warriors getting healing per second? Is it a min-maxing thing for tanks? Must be. Tanks can use it, DPS on raid damage. Yeah, okay. Makes sense. So going back to the original question of why do people do things that they don't enjoy in video games? Kevin's really speaking to the designers out there who are saying, don't forget about the people who don't respond to these external incentives, who are driven by internal incentives only. He's really encouraging everyone to focus on internal incentives over external incentives. And I think that sometimes degrades the quality of his argument because external incentives are very strong and typically preferred. And I think most human behavior, I think it's the exception when you find someone who acts out internal incentives over externals. To put it in the way that Julia Galef put it, someone who acts in a, what did she say? A person, it is difficult to convince someone of something whose salary depends on them not understanding it. If your DPS depends on you not understanding something, then you're not likely to pursue it. Yeah, maybe you can find a more fun way to play the game, but will your DPS be lower? Like, incentives are extremely important when looking at the way people play games. And we should not beat ourselves up over following compelling incentives into undesirable play patterns. But we should all understand what we like and don't like and try to find a way to hone in on what that is. We should heed our own call to adventure and set off on our hero's journey to find the treasure, to unlock inner potential, and to, if you do it right, improve the world around you. That is what yours truly is trying to do. I'm sacrificing all my gaming time to talk to you lovely folks and think through these things, and hopefully provide a place and a community where we can normalize disagreement and where we can normalize, what's the quote? Let me find it. Okay. This is a quote by Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Very simple. I have labored carefully not to mock, lament, or execrate human actions, but to understand them. That's our labor. Anyway, that's the end of my show. What do y'all think? Have you figured it out? I really appreciate everyone who hung out, took part in the conversation today. This has been really fun. For anyone just finding my content, this is what I do. I try to do useful conversation around engaging with games and game communities. And I'm doing this because I really think the way we commune over games is broken. I think I think there's an overall drift towards consumerism that hurts us all. And I've got ideas, and I think I'm interesting. We'll see if I'm right. Okay. So what else? I do this every single Monday night here on Twitch, and it's not game specific, which I think PlanetSide players are just figuring out because I've been covering that game for many weeks. I love PlanetSide and I will return to it, but I cannot be limited by it. And this will end up on YouTube after the fact. Search for Deeg on YouTube if you want to find that. And I will usually try to chapter these out so they're easy to go back and review individual sections that maybe you missed or you wanted to review and hear again. That'll all be there. I have some other projects in the works. I'm doing some outfit-specific content for PlanetSide at the moment. That's going to be a while before it comes out. And I'm workshopping a couple other ideas for stuff that all does the same thing of trying to talk out the problems and what they are. I think I should have more to say. I'm streaming on Twitch throughout the week when I play games, and I love to hear from you folks when I do that. I'm trying this thing now where I'm doing call-ins, and people can call in and just talk to me about games or whatever. I almost always find it cool conversations from doing that. So if it's something that you're inclined to do, watch for my go live notification and come say hey. I have a Discord where that's all done. If you like this, do all the things. Follow the stream, sub to the YouTube, like the video, etc. I think that's it. Have a good night, y'all.